Well, here we are again. Look, I want to talk about something which everybody talks about, but nobody really does anything. National defence. The defence of the country. Everybody talks about it. And what we've seen with the election of the great confabulator's new administration in the USA is how fickle the United States of America can be regarding its allies. Now, just to give you a bit of historical background. When Australia first became a federation on the 1st of January 1901, its major defence strategy revolved around the British Empire. The fact that the British Empire would protect them in times of need. And we saw this extraordinary support for World War I in this country. The war to end all war, but in reality a war fought by workers on either end of a bayonet. And out of a population of 5 million, almost 420,000 Australian men and a few nurses volunteered to fight in the Great War. The key word is volunteer. And of those 420,000, 62,000 died on the battlefield in a 4-year period. Another 60,000 died of their war wounds within a decade of returning home, and many were scarred for life. So that's the price that was paid for the British alliance. With the beginning of World War II, and especially with the entry of Japan, the Japanese imperial forces, into the war, it became blindly obvious to the Labor Australian government they couldn't rely on Britain, because most of their troops were actually in North Africa fighting the Germans. And when Singapore fell to the Japanese in 1942, there was really nothing preventing the Japanese from spreading south quite rapidly. And although there was a lot of war censorship going on, the important thing to remember is the Japanese imperial forces bombed Darwin, killing almost 400 people in that bombing raid. I think there were over 60 bombing raids in Darwin, Broome, Torres Strait, North Queensland. And if you ever go to the Torres Strait and go to Horn Island, you'll see the wreckage there. So the Labor government demanded that their troops be sent back. But in the interim, 18 to 20-year-olds were conscripted, given 2 months training, and sent to New Guinea. Now, they were described as chocos, chocolate soldiers. They would melt in the sun. But it was the chocos, these chocolate soldiers, who actually inflicted the first defeat on the Japanese imperial forces in the Battle of Kokoda. So post World War II, Australia became increasingly dependent on the United States of America to protect it from its neighbours. Those of us who are old enough to remember the 1960s and 1970s will remember the propaganda regarding the yellow hordes and the communists taking over the country, and how important it was to defend the country against these threats. Obviously the reality was a little bit different. But what we saw post World War II is more and more involvement with the United States military-industrial complex, which now has become a military-industrial digital complex. But over the last 10 years we've seen a huge shift in defence initiatives in this country. where not only do we have US bases at Pine Gap and other parts of Australia, We are now totally integrated into the US military digital industrial complex. The weapons which we purchase are mainly in the United States of America, whether it's nuclear submarines, whether it's missiles, and the price for that is total obedience. Now, we're of the opinion that somehow we're different to everybody else in the world. Now, the history of US imperialism during the 20th and the 21st century has been a history of cutting and running, of conducting proxy wars around the globe against the enemy of the day. Before the collapse of the Soviet Empire in 1989, it was the Soviet Empire. Now it's the Chinese Communist Party, the government of China. So there's all these balls up in the air, but theoretically the price we pay is intervention in every military foray that the United States has been involved in, whether it was the invasion of Iraq, looking for the elusive weapons of mass destruction which never existed, whether it's in Vietnam, whether it was Korea before that, and the list goes on and on. So is this the way that this country should be defended? That we ignore our geographical reality? Because last time I looked at a map of Australia, our neighbours to the north are not the United States of America, but the Southeast Asian countries, as well as Japan and possibly South Korea. So that's the dilemma. Although we have treaties with allies of the United States, whether it's Japan or South Korea, the fact is the change of administration, which has an anti-Chinese policy, puts us at the forefront of any future conflict. Whether it's a conflict involving Taiwan, whether it's another conflict, the fact is we are no longer isolated. Geography is no longer protection, as we see currently in the Middle East. It doesn't matter where you are. The fact is that depending on your alliances at a particular point in time, everybody is a potential target. Not only if you live in North Australia, but also if you live in Melbourne or even Tasmania. Every part of this country is a potential target. So how do we resolve this issue? The cry after World War II was populate or perish. But the fact is, increasing population growth in an era where there is no civil conscription and there's minimal interest in civilians joining the Australian Defence Forces, the fact is that the ability to defend this country, if there is such a thing as some type of foreign incursion, is totally dependent on our own resources and, more importantly, the alliances in our region. Anytime you look here, see, whether the legacy media or the virtual media, any discussion of defence capabilities, it's all about our alliance with the United States of America. Irrespective of how flaky and weird that administration is. Irrespective of the United States' specific policy to put the USA first and foremost. And that's what United States foreign policy is about. It's about forward defence. That's why it has over 852 foreign bases. It's about a military digital industrial complex. That's why 90%, almost 90%, sorry, 80% of the world's expenditure on armaments is conducted by the United States of America. So, are we willing to pursue this agenda of putting all our eggs in the one basket? Now, let's not forget, to the near north, Indonesia, I think the country with the 5th largest population in the world, with over 250 million people, is our closest neighbour. At the same time, other countries that we never talk about in terms of military alliances, countries like Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and the list goes on and on. Although we have an ASEAN agreement, the fact is that agreement's not worth the paper it's written on. So ultimately, the type of defence we are able to conduct in a militarised age with unlimited weapons of destruction and even weapons of mass destruction is limited to our ability to get on with our neighbours. It's limited to our ability not to be aligned, to be part of the non-aligned movement in the world, not taking sides. By taking sides, what we've done is we have made ourselves into a potential target in the near future. That's what happens to allies. So the reality is, can 26 million people living on a continent rely on an ally whose foreign policy is dominated by the advancement of the United States foreign policy? Obviously, our ability to defend a continent is difficult. It's not something we can do alone. But ultimately, where is the threat? Where is the threat we are facing? Is it a manufactured threat designed to create fear in the Australian population about a future that shouldn't really hold fear? Is it about preparing us for warfare as an ally of one particular side of this struggle for dominance? Although we have an increasing number of United States troops based in this country, I think over 5,000 currently, we have US foreign bases. We are buying US missiles. We've entered a contract for the production of nuclear-powered submarines. We also buy our aircraft in the United States of America. The fact is that we are totally integrated into an exceptionally unreliable ally. This is no way to conduct defence policy in this country. We have a government that continues to spend more and more resources of armaments, and we have an opposition which is baying at the bit to have a war against China. It's eerily reminiscent of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States of America, which most of the world was dragged into. So, do we really think increasing cooperation with a flaky, unstable United States administration is somehow going to protect us in this part of the world? Do you really think the United States of America, if push came to shove, concerned about its own protection, would deploy troops down here to assist us? We are one of the few countries in the world that continues to go all the way with the USA. If the opposition was in power, we'd have ships in the Middle East, as well as troops. The fact is that when you look at the two major parties, we have two hawkish policies, one more than the other. The fact is, nobody talks about non-alignment. Nobody talks about increasing regional defence ties. And if there's one country which was an ally in the past, which has shown the way forward, it's Malaysia, which has taken a non-aligned position in this so-called dispute for supremacy between the Chinese Communist Party and the flaky United States administration. The fact is, we are poised. We are poised on a precipice. We can still walk back from that precipice. And that entails an unaligned foreign policy. That's right, a non-aligned foreign policy, and more importantly, increasing regional cooperation in our region with what is almost a third of the world's population. The fact is, this is our geographical reality. We cannot change our geographical reality, but we can change the way we see the world as a people. I don't remember, but in the 1890s, the threat in Australia was Russia, and Victoria bought a warship, the HMAS Cerberus, which has been sunk off Half Moon Bay in Melbourne. You can actually see the remnants of it there. And they set up cannon emplacements at the entry of Port Phillip Bay. The fact is, the political position and the nationality of the so-called threats we face change over and over again. But the reality is, our ultimate path to security is securing regional alignments with the people in our geographical part of the world. To rely on somebody who has a mixed historical response, who's only interested basically in making America great again, not that it ever was great, that is only interested in protecting the interests of the USA, is a mistake. In the past, it was a mistake with little consequence, apart from the troops, the Australian troops, which were sacrificed to support United States interventions around the world. Today, the consequences are much more widespread. The improvement in the ability to deliver death anywhere in the world at any time makes everybody a target. And for us as a people, a miserable 26 million people living on a continent, to rely on an unstable ally to protect us is ludicrous. So it's time we began debating foreign policy, looking at alternatives, and maybe, just maybe, we should be looking at the position the Malaysian government has taken in terms of this so-called dispute between China and the United States, into which we have been dragged into holus bolus. Because ultimately, it's not about you and me, because possibly nothing will happen in the next decade or two, but ultimately it's the future of our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and the very future of this country. Unless we understand this is our geographical reality and we need to work with the people around us to protect us, not rely on some foreign entity to do the job, we will put the whole population at risk.